Wordsworth said, "The child is father to the man." As Alan's mother, I'd like to show you the child, who was in Wordsworth's meaning father to the man before I show you the man he became, the man whom we memorialize with a conservancy named for him. His professors or his students or his peers wouldn't give you that particular insight, only his mother would. Alan David Broussard was born on January 13, 1961 at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where his daddy was an Army physician during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I have said that I marked him as a naturalist by hanging a bird mobile over his baby bed. Since his first word was bird, or rather D for birdie, maybe I did mark him. Alan's first visit to the Broussard family ranch, the Flying J, in southwest Louisiana, was the beginning of his identity as a country boy. He was given a cow for a birth present. Here he's with his grandfather and a cousin. The Army moved us back to California, where his daddy would spend 3 years as an ophthalmology resident physician at Letterman General Hospital on the Presidio of San Francisco. We had a summer in Maine for a special course in ophthalmology basic sciences. Alan and his sisters are on a big chunk of petrified log in Washington State on our way back to California. Lynn in green shirt is a CPA now, and Dion, our eldest, is a PhD neuroscientist with her own research lab at the University of Toronto. Lynn was his buddy, Dion his teacher. She taught Alan birds from pictures as soon as he could baby talk their names. Back in California, we had a good backyard for birds. No matter where we lived, we took advantage of the natural wonders in the area to teach all our children about nature. So here's our embryo naturalist with California seaweed. Alan had a heritage of concern with living things. Alan's grandparents on my side were biology teachers and kept us supplied with books about living things, teaching aids like bird cards, field guides, preserved insects, spiders, etc. And his other grandparents were, as you saw, very much tied to the land. Alan was always smiling. One shopkeeper would say, "Here comes Smiley," whenever he saw us. He amused his Louisiana relatives with his fascination with amphibians. He and his grandfather collected a bucket full of toads, and Alan expressed his concern that the big ones would eat the little ones. His grandfather said not to worry, but pretty soon there was a big one with the feet of the little one sticking out of its mouth. Alan rescued the little fellow, and from then on gave more weight to his own judgment about animal behavior. On our way to Germany for a 3-year tour of duty, we stopped to see my family in Florida. The Black Forest in Germany in November is a bit cooler than a Florida beach in September. Alan never seemed to mind cold or heat, insect bites, dirt, discomfort, even pain. That came in handy later. And now there's a little sister to play with, too. He always got along with everybody, maybe because he started out with such neat sisters. On the French Mediterranean coast, Alan was too interested in the squid he had found to notice the cold, but Dion wasn't. We took our kids on side trips while we were overseas. Alan found this baby shark on a beach in Portugal. He thought if he could gather enough stork feathers, he should be able to fly. 3 wasn't enough. He tried up to about a dozen before giving up. Back in the U.S. on the Flying J Ranch in Louisiana, and in a Florida maritime hammock where our backyard is today. Besides this pet iguana, Alan kept snakes, fish, birds, mammals. Once he incurred Lynn's wrath when he fed some of her gerbils to his snake. He liked scouting and earned all the Weeblo badges. Other scouts called him Nature Boy. He was such a good birder that by age 11, Indian River Audubon Society gave him a team for the Christmas count and relied on his judgment. We raised this mockingbird from infancy. He still remembered us a year later. This ptarmigan in Alberta was a new bird for Alan, but he knew that to get close to it, he had to get low. By now, we have the Crescent J Ranch in Florida, where you are now. Alan and Laura had their own ponies, and rode them in the Silver Spurs Parade in nearby Kissimmee with a friend. This wild 7-foot 2-inch eastern indigo snake stopped by our yard for a visit. That was not so rare in 1973. These beautiful animals are so docile, they've been hunted almost to extinction for the pet trade. A 5-day canoeing camping trip in Ontario, which included a difficult portage through tornado-strewn timber, kept us all very much tuned in to nature. On a backpacking trip along the Continental Divide in Colorado, the kids made a deal with their dad, $1 for every second they could stay up to their necks in this 33-degree water from a snowfield. Laura and Lynn earned $15 and $30 respectively. Alan earned $60, and if we hadn't had a limit of a minute on the deal, he'd have stayed in at least to hypothermia. He had to keep his teenage surfer image even in Utah. He was a very good surfer. He also liked to fish and sail and camp. He struck this dramatic explorer pose as we set out on a 4-day backpacking jaunt in a pathless part of Denali National Park in Alaska. Mom and Laura copied him. One backpacking campsite was scenic, if a little treacherous. Alan went down to find a restroom. That's toilet paper he's waving. He was a lot of fun. This picture represents the turning point in Alan's life that our Alaska trip was. He was excited about going, but went just a boy, not really thinking about his future or college, but he came back with a new realization that he could spend his life studying and working in the field that was already his lifelong love, nature. There's spawning salmon in that shallow stream. None of us had ever seen anything like this, not even on TV. We were thinking, wow, look at all those fish. Alan was standing there figuring out in about 5 or 10 minutes what was going on. When we asked him what he was seeing, he described the spawning habits of the 4 different kinds of salmon down below. He'd never even seen a salmon before, yet he was able to distinguish 4 different species and determine their very different spawning requirements and behavior. I said, Alan, you have a remarkable talent that you really ought to develop. A light dawned in his eyes then that never went out again, even when he was very sick. That fish story was just one of several dramatic nature stories about things he pointed out to us on that trip. We didn't know it for another 6 months, but he already had Hodgkin's disease while we were in Alaska. We found out he took one last water skiing day with his high school buddies before we took him to Stanford University for treatment. That's called a rooster tail. He could even ski barefooted, walking on water. He was in superb physical condition, which made the most rigorous treatment possible. College was delayed for 2 years while he underwent surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy, which really did kill the cancer and took him down to skin and bones with only wisps of his beautiful hair left. But he had a summer to recover, and we took a dive trip to celebrate. That's a tickle stick in his hand to tickle lobsters out of holes in the coral. He caught these 2 huge ones and had fun teasing his reluctant Colorado brother-in-law into holding one for this picture. You can see the scar running from chest to navel from the operation to remove his cancerous spleen and abdominal lymph nodes. But finally he could go to college at Colorado State University, which was known as having the best wildlife program at the time. Here we are in Rocky Mountain National Park, where Alan was teaching us about the ecosystem there. Alan was afire with his new knowledge of ecology. He made straight A's, competing with Laura, who went to school out there too, to be with him. They graduated with honors, and that's why they got to wear golden caps and gowns instead of the regular forest green. Here's Alan's future bride, Barbara, also a biologist, who graduated a semester ahead of him. Before starting graduate school, Alan worked on a research project with the rare Yuma clapper rail in a marsh in the lower Colorado River Valley. He's amused by what the bird did on his hand and said that showed the bird trusted him. It was there he had a near-fatal heart attack. A major coronary artery had been damaged by his cancer treatment. Surgeons patched his heart up but told us he'd eventually need a transplant. He came home to Florida to recuperate. His scar now goes all the way up to his collarbones. He had told the surgeons after a second open heart surgery that they should have put a zipper in that time, considering the future heart transplant. Back in Arizona to finish the research project, they put radio transmitters on the rails and charted their movements. Then to the University of Illinois, where he entered the PhD program and was soon recognized for his ability by professors, peers, and students, all of whom seemed to love him. They teased him that the number of freshman girls increased dramatically for the classes he taught. He seemed to like that teasing. Alan was always very down to earth, both studying living things and with the people he loved. In Illinois, Florida, Colorado, the Galapagos Islands, this was on his honeymoon, Montana, Georgia, Louisiana, Utah, and Australia. Alan's last research project, one he designed, was in the central Australian outback, just out of Alice Springs. The trip back to Illinois when Australian airlines were on strike and he had to cross half that continent by bus and train, then half of ours by plane, took 84 hours. He was in heart failure by the time he got to Los Angeles, and he still had to get to Illinois. It was just too much for his damaged heart. In the 3 months' wait for the new heart, he became the pet of the ICU nurses. The doctors, too. Everyone was pulling for him. His heart had to be monitored continuously all that time, so he had to wait for the nurse with the portable monitor even to take a walk in the ICU halls. He said he kept looking for a fire plug, being on a leash like a puppy dog. While in the hospital, he remembered all the wild places he had been, including the area around Bull Creek, south of the ranch, which he knew was biologically valuable and virtually undisturbed. He expressed a wish that it could be saved, and when his dad said it might be possible, he got all excited, calling his friends about it. He got to meet his namesake, Alan McGonigal, Lynn's son, and he finally got his new heart, but succumbed to infection 6 weeks later. Barb accepted his degree posthumously. Alan's personality may be too ephemeral to hold, but his legacy of preserved natural Florida is solid and can be enjoyed by many humans and other creatures into the future.
Hello, my name is Bill Broussard. My father told me, take time to dream and don't be afraid to reach for the stars. This idea, coming from the person I thought to be the very epitome of the hard-driving, practical rancher, so startled me as a boy that I never forgot it. The land we now call Forever Florida was our son Alan's dream. It has become our dream. As a 10th-generation cattleman, I would not have been fulfilled, as my wife Margaret often said, without a ranch. Soon after we moved to Florida in 1967, we were able to acquire what is now the Crescent J Ranch. On this 1,280-acre cattle ranch, I continued my father's program of breeding high-quality Charolais cattle. Alan spent a lot of time there between the ages of 9 and 19. Adjacent to the ranch, with more than 2 miles of common border, was a 3,200-acre tract. This tract had been sold off in 1.25 to 2.5-acre lots in a typical Florida land scam from 1958 to 1978. No roads were built, nor was the land surveyed. The lots were never identified on the ground. Here is the main trail, an old logging trail, on some of the higher ground in wet season. 90% of the land was not accessible because of creeks, sloughs, swamps, and marshes. Our eldest daughter, Dion, and grandson, Connor, are studying the tadpole crossing of the trail. We very much appreciate the enthusiastic support of our three daughters, whose inheritance we are spending on this project, along with our retirement money. While the land scam was terrible for the unsuspecting buyers, it was the cause of this land remaining in nearly pristine condition. As a child, Alan often wandered through the low hammock or wet woods of Bull Creek. After Alan's death, we set up a memorial fund with the Nature Conservancy and had them come look at our target project. They were discouraging in that they felt acquiring this land from 500-plus owners was not a good way to spend their resources. We therefore used the memorial fund to help them acquire the keystone piece of what has become a state conservation and recreation lands project, or CARL project, which the state calls the Allen Broussard Catfish Creek State Preserve. We call it Allen Scrub. It is now about 6,000 acres of Central Ridge dunes and scrub, with acquisition continuing. This is the back view of a bust of Allen on the highest relic dune near the center of the preserve. Margaret and I realized that while the scrub project was very nice, it was not what Allen had asked us to do. We went back to our friends at the Nature Conservancy and asked their guidance in setting up a nonprofit organization which we named the Allen Broussard Conservancy. The Conservancy made its first purchase on Forever, Florida in December 1991. By spending much time on courthouse records, we were able to locate almost all of the owners. We have sent mail-outs to them about once a year. Each mailing produces a rush of willing sellers at first and a slowing trickle coming in over several months. The orange blaze on a tree is the mark of the Florida Trail, a hiking trail which, if completed, will run the full length of the state. We are proud to have 4.5 miles of the trail on Forever, Florida. At times, the trail is a little wet. Over the last 8 years, the Conservancy has averaged about one purchase every 1.5 weeks and now owns almost 2,200 of the 3,200 acres, and buying continues. With each letter to the owners, we extend an invitation to come let us show them around. Surprisingly, most of the owners still have not seen the tract. Those who come invariably sell. Some who don't come are still convinced that they own a piece of the developer's dream of Florida, not knowing that it looks more like this. Most of the acreage in Forever, Florida is flatwoods with longleaf pine overstory, dry prairie or wet prairie, all of which are fire-dependent ecosystems. Most of this land had not burned in many years and was badly overgrown. Once land acquisition was going well, we became more aware of the necessity of fire management. After some study, we began a program of managed prescribed burns. Here's an illustration of the technique of blacklining, starting an upwind backfire against a minimal fire break such as this trail. Some simple tools of the trade, a drip torch and a flapper, are also seen. After securing the downwind side, I usually use a head fire to more closely mimic nature. Margaret and I have taken a course on prescribed burns through Hillsborough Community College and have become certified by the state as burn managers. We have learned the extreme importance of growing season burns for most native grasses and wildflowers. This picture illustrates the very different results between a winter fire in the foreground and a growing season fire in the background. The foreground fire was in February and the background fire in June of the same year. We have seen how rapidly fire-dependent ecosystems recover from fires. This is the day of the fire with the smoke seen in the background. This is 1 week later, 2 weeks later, 1 month later, 3 months later. We are now seeing certain grasses we had not noticed before because they were not producing seed. This is toothache grass. Most of the native grasses produce seed only in the year of the burn, and then only if the burn was in late spring to midsummer. This is lopsided Indian grass. Some grasses, such as this one, produce seed in profusion only in the first and second year following the burn. We have been amazed at the fire tolerance of the longleaf pine. 2 weeks after burning to a crisp, the terminal bud, called a candle, is already growing. And 3 months post-burn, it looks like this. After fires, we have seen many, many more flowers blooming. This species, listed for protection, is usually described as a solitary flower. After 3 burns and the exclusion of cattle, we have begun to see pine lilies in clumps of 4 to 6. We think we are seeing more creatures of all types since the starting of burns. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the cattle operation continues. This is a peaceful afternoon at the spa. We have added a herd of Florida cracker cows, direct descendants of those cattle left here by the Spanish explorers 450 years ago. These are now recognized as a distinct breed and have their own breed association. Many are as wild as deer. This is reflected by the original name for the Florida cowboy, which was cow hunter. There were cow hunters in Florida before there were cowboys in Texas. Large-scale cattle ranching was invented in Florida. The cracker cow is the ultimate easy keeper, that is, able to sustain itself on a bare minimum of forage without supplements. This steer suddenly remembered he had an important engagement somewhere else. And this steer didn't remember in time. The cowboy is our foreman, Billy Davis. This bull questions my authority to be there. You can see his girlfriend urging him on. The ranch also supplies some scenic views and friendly wildlife habitat. Satellite photograph of East Central Florida, You can see Cape Canaveral to the northeast and the Indian River Lagoon along the Atlantic coast. The yellow arrow indicates the gray strip of forever Florida. Gray areas are undisturbed land. Red is agricultural and white is urban. This is a tourist hurrying to visit forever Florida. So Alan's dream is becoming a reality. Another reality is the need for income to assure the protection of forever Florida into the future. 30% of the gross income is a donation to the Broussard Conservancy. It goes directly toward the continued acquisition and management of the conservation land forever Florida.
Florida, forever Florida, glorious sunshine land, osprey waltzing on the wind, o'er your mighty cypress stand, great blue heron, won't you be our guide? Cross the prairie, eagles at our side. Florida, forever Florida, you're a glorious sunshine land. Florida, you're a living legacy with haunting melodies, singing rich, proud heritage, land so wild and free. We hear sweet symphonies of your dreams of days gone by, way things ought to be. Florida, forever Florida, you're a land so wild and free. Florida, young man a-dreamin', full of hopes and plans, now forever part of Florida, child of this golden land. His dreams are rising with the dawn of early morn, living forever in peaceful mist adorned. Florida, forever Florida, your spirit will live forever. Ooh. Of this journey's end, but we'll see you again somewhere on a Florida wind. Florida, forever Florida, you're my home, sweet home. You're my home, sweet home. sweet home.